Claimed by the mountain man, the gavel cracked like thunder, and the courtroom erupted in laughter. Mara Ellison stood trembling on the auction platform, her wrists bound, her dignity stripped bare before a crowd of leering men. The judge's voice boomed across the Wyoming courthouse. $100 to any man willing to take this burden off our hands. The offers came fast, 50, 30, 20, each number lower than the last, each word a knife to her heart. She was 23 years old, and her life was being bartered like livestock in the spring of 1885. If you want to know how a woman finds her worth when the world declares her worthless, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Mara's story travels. The courthouse stank of tobacco, sweat, and the particular sourness that clung to men who considered cruelty a form of entertainment. Mara kept her eyes fixed on a knot in the floorboards, counting the whorls in the wood, because it was easier than meeting the gazes that crawled over her like insects. Her guardian, Vernon Pritchard, stood beside the judge's bench with his arms crossed, satisfaction gleaming in his watery eyes. He'd finally found a way to settle his gambling debts that didn't require actual money. "Come now, gentlemen," Judge Harlan Bickford called out, his jowls quivering with amusement. "Surely one of you needs a cook, a laundress, someone to warm your bed on cold nights." The implication drew another wave of laughter. "She's strong as an ox. Look at the size of her. Could probably plow a field without the horse." Heat flooded Mara's face, but she refused to cry. She'd learned years ago that tears only made men like these laugh harder. Her size had been a source of shame since childhood. Too tall, too broad, too much. The other girls in St. Louis had whispered behind their hands. The matrons at the orphanage had clicked their tongues. And Vernon, her mother's cousin who'd taken her in after the cholera outbreak, had made it clear from the start that feeding her was a burden he barely tolerated. $20, someone called from the back. 20! The judge's eyebrows shot up. "My good man, you can buy a decent horse for $20. Surely this fine specimen is worth at least that much." More laughter. Mara's fingernails bit into her palms. 15 then, the same voice amended. "And that's generous." The judge sighed theatrically. $15. Going once. I'll take her. The voice came from the shadowed corner near the door, low and rough as gravel. The laughter died. Mara lifted her head for the first time since Vernon had dragged her into this nightmare, and her breath caught. The man who stepped forward into the light was enormous, not fat. Mara had learned to recognize the difference, but built like the mountains themselves, all broad shoulders and dense muscle beneath a worn canvas coat. Dark hair hung past his collar, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that made the room go quiet. Gray as winter skies, cold and empty as abandoned wells. Judge Bickford recovered first, though Mara noticed his smile had tightened. "Well, well, Caleb Rourke, haven't seen you down from your mountain in, what's it been, 2 years? 3. Rourke's gaze never left Mara. She felt pinned by it, examined and measured in a way that made her want to shrink despite her size. "I'll pay the debt, whatever it is." Vernon stepped forward eagerly. $347, plus interest, of course. I wasn't talking to you. Rourke's voice dropped to something dangerous. Vernon actually stepped back. "What's the debt, Judge?" Bickford shuffled papers, his earlier amusement gone. Everyone in the territory knew Caleb Rourke's story, or thought they did. Mountain man, trapper, had killed 3 men in a single fight 5 years back, though whether it was murder or self-defense depended on who was telling it. He'd retreated to the high country afterward and rarely came down except to trade furs and buy supplies. Most people were happy to leave him there. "The debt is $218, Bickford said carefully. "Gambling debts, accumulated over, I'll pay $250. That covers the debt and any administrative costs." Rourke pulled a leather pouch from his coat and dropped it on the judge's bench with a heavy clink. "Draw up the papers." Mara's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. She'd expected to be claimed by some rancher's wife who needed an extra pair of hands, or a saloon owner looking for cheap labor. The best she'd hoped for was a quick death. But this? "Now see here, Rourke," Vernon sputtered, finding his courage in greed. That money is mine by right. The girl is my ward, my responsibility. Then you should have taken better care of her. Rourke finally looked at Vernon, and whatever the smaller man saw in those gray eyes made him go pale. Papers. Now. The judge moved quickly, scribbling on official-looking documents while the courtroom remained silent. Mara watched as if from a great distance as money changed hands, as ink dried on paper, as her life was transferred from one man to another like a deed to property. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt like water. "It's done," Bickford said, sliding the papers across his desk. "She's yours, legal and binding. May you have better luck with her than Pritchard did." He couldn't resist adding, loud enough for the room to hear, "Though I'd suggest you keep plenty of food on hand. That one looks like she could eat you out of house and home." The laughter started again, but it died the instant Rourke turned. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. He simply looked at each man in turn until they found something fascinating about their boots to study. Then he crossed to Mara in 3 long strides and cut the ropes binding her wrists with a knife that appeared and disappeared so quickly she barely saw it. "You can walk?" His voice was quiet now, meant only for her. Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. Her wrists were raw where the rope had bit, red marks already blooming into bruises. "Then walk." He headed for the door without waiting to see if she followed. She stood frozen for a heartbeat, 2, then her feet moved of their own accord. What choice did she have? Behind her she heard Vernon's voice rise in complaint, something about being cheated, about rightful compensation, but Rourke's footsteps never slowed. Mara hurried after him, her worn shoes scuffing against the wooden floor. The crowd parted like water, men pressing back against the walls to let them pass. The spring sunshine outside felt like a slap after the dim courthouse. Mara blinked against the brightness, disoriented, as Rourke strode toward a massive bay gelding tied to the hitching post. The horse was as big as its owner, all muscle and careful power. "You ride?" Rourke asked, untying the reins. No, not really." Mara's voice came out scratchy from disuse. She'd barely spoken in weeks. He nodded once, then swung into the saddle with an ease that belied his size. He looked down at her, and for a moment something that might have been consideration crossed his face. "You can walk 6 miles?" 6 miles. Mara thought of her thin shoes, the rocky road leading out of town. "Yes." "Then follow. Keep up." He turned the horse north toward the mountains that rose like broken teeth against the sky. Mara stared after him, panic rising in her throat. "Wait, where are we going? What are you—" But he was already moving, the horse's hooves kicking up dust. He didn't look back. She had 2 choices: stand here in this town that had just witnessed her humiliation, or follow a stranger into the wilderness. Neither was good. Neither was safe. But at least in the mountains, there would be no one to laugh at her. Mara started walking. The town fell away quickly. Willow Creek was small, even by frontier standards, a handful of buildings clinging to existence in a valley that saw brutal winters and unreliable water. Mara had only been there 3 weeks, ever since Vernon had dragged her west from St. Louis with promises of opportunity that had evaporated the moment they arrived. He'd gone straight to the gambling halls. She'd gone to the boarding house he'd arranged, wondering how long his money would last. Not long, as it turned out. Ahead of her, Rourke maintained a steady pace, never looking back. The sun climbed higher. Mara's feet began to ache, then burn, then go numb. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on the rhythm of walking, on anything except the question screaming in her mind. Why had he chosen her? What did he want? Men didn't pay good money for women unless they wanted something. The road narrowed to a trail. Pine trees closed in on both sides, their shadows offering brief respite from the heat. Mara's dress, her only dress, a faded blue calico that had been mended too many times, stuck to her back with sweat. Her breath came harder. The altitude maybe, or fear, or both. When she stumbled over a root and nearly fell, Rourke finally stopped. He dismounted and pulled a canteen from his saddle, then walked back to where she stood swaying. He held it out without a word. Mara took it with shaking hands and drank. The water was cold, clean, the best thing she'd tasted in weeks. She forced herself to stop before she drained it, handing it back. "Thank you." He studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes unreadable. Then he handed her a piece of jerky from his saddlebag. "Eat. We've got 3 more miles." "I can make it," Mara said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Didn't say you couldn't." He remounted and continued on. The trail grew steeper. Mara's lungs burned. She focused on Rourke's back, on the steady sway of the horse, on the pine scent that grew stronger as they climbed. She'd always been strong. That was part of the problem, according to the people who'd made her life hell. Strong and big and unfeminine. But strength was just another word for useful. And useful meant you worked until you dropped. So she didn't drop. She climbed. The sun was past its peak when they emerged into a clearing. Mara stopped, her aching legs forgotten. The cabin sat in a natural hollow, protected on 3 sides by pines and overlooking a valley that stretched toward distant peaks still capped with snow. It was larger than she'd expected, solidly built from thick logs chinked with clay. A stone chimney rose from one end. A small barn stood nearby, and she could hear the distant burble of water, a creek probably, hidden in the trees. It was beautiful. Isolated and stark, but beautiful. Rourke dismounted and led his horse toward the barn. "Water pump's there," he said, pointing to a structure near the cabin. "Outhouse behind the pines. Barn's off limits unless I say otherwise." He paused, his hand on the barn door. "You'll sleep in the cabin. There's a room in the back. It's yours." Mara found her voice. "What do you want from me?" He turned, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes besides emptiness. Surprise, maybe. "Want?" "You paid money for me. Men don't do that without expecting something in return." She lifted her chin, trying to find some scrap of dignity. "I'd rather know now what you expect." Rourke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I expect you to work. Cook, clean, tend the garden when it's planted. Mend what needs mending. Earn your keep." He paused. "That's all." "That's all." Mara heard the skepticism in her own voice. "That's all." He met her eyes steadily. "You'll work, I'll provide. You stay out of my way, I'll stay out of yours. Clear?" It was too simple, too clean. Men like him didn't pay good money just for a housekeeper. "And at night?" Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by something that might have been anger, but not at her. "You'll sleep in your room with the door barred. I'll sleep in mine. What happened in that courthouse was business, nothing more. I needed help up here. You needed out of there. That's the arrangement." Mara wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly her chest ached. "Why me?" "Because you were the only one who didn't cry." He turned back to the barn. "Get yourself settled. Supper's in 2 hours." He disappeared inside, leaving Mara alone in the clearing. She stood there as the enormity of the day crashed over her. The courthouse, the laughter, the walk, this place. This strange, silent man who'd bought her freedom and now claimed to want nothing but work. She didn't believe it, couldn't afford to believe it. But she was here, and the alternative was back there, and at least in this place no one was laughing. Mara walked to the cabin on aching feet and pushed open the door. The interior was as solid as the exterior. One large room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies. Everything was clean, orderly, well-maintained. A door on the far wall stood slightly ajar. Mara crossed to it and looked inside. The room was small but adequate. A narrow bed with a thick quilt, a chest at its foot, a single window looking out toward the valley, and on the inside of the door, a heavy wooden bar that could be lowered into iron brackets. A lock. He'd given her a lock. Something in Mara's chest cracked, just a little. She closed the door and tested the bar. Solid, secure. Then she sat on the bed, her bed, and let herself shake. She'd survived. For now, that was enough. The 2 hours passed in a blur of exhausted half-sleep. Mara jolted awake when she heard footsteps outside, her heart racing until she remembered where she was. She smoothed her dress, finger-combed her hair, and emerged from the room to find Rourke setting out food on the table. Bread, butter, cold venison, dried apples. Simple fare, but more than she'd seen in weeks. "Sit," he said. Mara sat. They ate in silence. Rourke focused on his plate, Mara trying not to eat too quickly despite her hunger. The bread was good, dense, and filling. The venison was tough, but flavorful. She forced herself to stop before she was full, old habits of rationing dying hard. When Rourke pushed his plate away, he finally looked at her. Rules, he said. First, you don't go into the barn without permission. Second, you don't touch my traps, my furs, or my guns. Third, you don't wander off alone until you know the area. Bears, cats, cliffs, plenty of ways to die up here if you're careless. Mara nodded. Understood. Fourth, we split the work. I hunt, trap, maintain the buildings. You cook, clean, preserve food, tend the garden come summer. We both haul water, chop wood, and handle whatever else needs doing. That's fair. He studied her. You know how to cook? Yes, clean, mend, preserve food. I can handle chickens if you have them. I'm not afraid of work. Good. He stood, gathering the plates. You'll need better shoes. I'll make a pair. Your dress is falling apart. There's fabric in the chest in your room, needles and thread in the basket by the fireplace. Make what you need. Mara's throat tightened. I can pay you back. I don't want payment. His voice was flat. I want someone who can handle this place when I'm on the trap lines. Someone who won't die of loneliness or stupidity before winter sets in. You do that, we're even. It was the most he'd said at once since they'd left town. Mara absorbed it, trying to understand this man who'd bought her and now seemed determined to treat her like, what? An employee? A partner? Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why did you really choose me? Rourke was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on the plates. When he spoke, his voice was low. Because when I looked at you standing on that platform, I saw the same look in your eyes that I see in the mirror. The look that says you've stopped expecting anything good. He turned to face her. I figured someone like that might be willing to work for something simple, like being left alone. The honesty of it struck Mara like a physical blow. She'd been expecting lies, manipulation, the same games men had always played. Instead, he'd given her the truth, raw and uncomfortable. I can work, she said quietly. I can work hard, and I won't be trouble. Then we'll get along fine. He carried the plates to a wash basin and began cleaning them with efficient movements. Get some rest. Morning comes early up here. Mara retreated to her room, closed the door, and lowered the bar. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the sounds of Rourke moving around the cabin, water sloshing, wood being added to the fire, his heavy footsteps crossing to what must be his own room. Then silence. She lay back on the quilt, staring at the darkening ceiling. Her body ached from the walk, from weeks of poor food and little sleep, from the weight of fear she'd been carrying since Vernon had first dragged her to that courthouse. But here, in this small room with its sturdy lock, she felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Safe. It might be temporary. It might be an illusion. But for tonight, she could close her eyes without wondering what new horror tomorrow would bring. Mara slept. The days that followed established a rhythm. Mara woke with the sun, started the fire, made coffee and breakfast. Rourke ate quickly and disappeared, checking traps, hunting, or working on whatever mysterious tasks occupied him in the barn. Mara cleaned, organized, took stock of supplies. She made herself 2 new dresses from the fabric in the chest, sturdy work dresses that fit her properly for the first time in years. She mended everything that needed mending, clothes, blankets, the torn corner of a quilt. Rourke was true to his word. He kept his distance, spoke only when necessary, and treated her with a careful neutrality that was almost jarring after a lifetime of judgment. He left a pair of boots outside her door on the 3rd morning, perfectly sized, better than anything she'd ever owned. When she thanked him, he just nodded and walked away. By the end of the first week, Mara had mapped the clearing, located the creek, and memorized the layout of the cabin. She'd also begun to notice things. The way Rourke's shoulders tensed when he heard unexpected sounds. The carefully controlled precision of his movements, like a man who'd learned to contain violence. The nightmares that sometimes woke him in the dark. She could hear him through the walls, the sudden gasp, the long silence that followed. He was haunted. Whatever had driven him to these mountains, whatever had put that emptiness in his eyes, it lived with him still. On the 8th day, she worked up the courage to ask a question. They were eating supper, venison stew she'd made from meat he'd brought back that morning, when she said, "How long have you lived up here?" Rourke looked up from his bowl. 5 years. Alone? Yes. Don't you? She hesitated. Don't you get lonely? He was quiet for a moment. Lonely's better than the alternative. Mara understood that. Loneliness was clean, simple. It didn't judge you or mock you or reduce you to a number. What was the alternative? People. He pushed back from the table. I'm not good with people. You seem fine to me. He actually laughed, a short, harsh sound without humor. That's because you don't know me. He carried his bowl to the wash basin. And because you don't ask questions. I just asked too. Fair enough. He turned, leaning against the counter. What do you want to know? It was a test, Mara realized. A line drawn in the dirt. She could step back, stay safe in the careful distance they'd maintained, or she could step forward, risk the fragile peace they'd built. Why did you kill those men? The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the fire crackling. Rourke's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, surprise maybe, that she'd gone straight to the heart of it. They were trying to kill me, he said finally. I was faster. The judge said there was a trial, that you were acquitted. The judge talks too much. Rourke crossed his arms. It was self-defense. They were claim jumpers who didn't like being told no. They came at me with guns. I came back with my knife. End of story. But you left anyway, came up here. Because even when you're acquitted, people don't forget. They look at you different, talk different, treat you like you might snap any moment and gut them. His jaw tightened. I got tired of being the monster in everyone else's story, so I left. Mara absorbed this, understanding more than he probably realized. I'm too big, she said quietly. That's my crime. Too tall, too broad. Too much space taken up in a world that thinks women should be small and delicate. Every place I've ever been, I've been the joke, the burden, the thing people tolerate until they can find a way to get rid of me. She met his eyes. So I understand leaving. I understand wanting to be somewhere people can't look at you like you're wrong just for existing. Rourke stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement that felt more valuable than any words could have been. We should sleep, he said. Storm coming tomorrow. We'll need to secure everything. He was right. Mara woke to the smell of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. The sky had turned the color of old bruises, heavy and oppressive. Rourke was already outside when she emerged, checking the barn, securing the shutters. She helped without being asked, working alongside him to bring in extra wood, cover the tools, make sure everything that could blow away was tied down. The storm hit at noon. Rain lashed the cabin in waves, driven by wind that made the walls shudder. Lightning cracked close enough to leave spots in Mara's vision, followed by thunder that shook her bones. She'd never experienced weather like this. St. Louis had storms, but nothing this violent, this raw. Rourke sat at the table, cleaning his guns with methodical precision, apparently unbothered. Mara tried to read, but the words wouldn't stick. She paced to the window, watched the rain turn the clearing into a muddy mess, paced back. You scared of storms? Rourke asked without looking up. I don't know. We didn't have them like this where I'm from. You'll get used to it. Mountains make their own weather. He reassembled the rifle with quick, practiced movements. This is nothing. Wait until winter. Storms that last 3 days, snow so deep you can't see the cabin from the barn, wind that sounds like screaming. It should have frightened her. Instead, Mara felt something strange stir in her chest, something that might have been anticipation. And you just wait them out? What else can you do? You prepare, you endure, you survive. He finally looked at her. That's life up here. Simple. The storm raged through the afternoon and into the evening. They ate cold food, not wanting to open the stove and let the smoke blow back. The temperature dropped. Mara wrapped herself in a blanket and sat by the fire, watching the flames dance, listening to the howling wind and Rourke's quiet breathing across the room. Thank you, she said suddenly. He looked up from the fur he was examining. For what? For treating me like a person. The words came out rougher than she intended. For keeping your word about the arrangement. Rourke set down the fur. You thought I wouldn't. I thought men never do. Most men are bastards. He said it matter-of-factly, without heat. But you don't need to thank me for basic decency. That should be a given. Should be, isn't. Mara pulled the blanket tighter. Every man I've ever known has wanted something. Usually something I couldn't give or didn't want to give. You're the first one who's asked for nothing but work. Work's honest. Everything else gets complicated. He stood, stretching. I'm turning in. Storm should blow through by morning. Mara nodded and retreated to her room. But as she lay in bed listening to the thunder roll away into the distance, she realized something had shifted. The careful distance between them had narrowed, just a fraction. They'd shared truths tonight, small ones maybe, but real. And for the first time since Rourke had claimed her in that courthouse, Mara allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she might survive more than just her body up here. She might survive whole. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the world scrubbed clean and gleaming. Mara woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of an axe biting into wood. She dressed quickly in one of her new dresses, dark green calico that actually fit her shoulders, and emerged to find Rourke splitting logs with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. He glanced up when she appeared. Coffee's ready. We need to clear the debris before it gets hot. They worked through the morning, hauling fallen branches, checking for damage, clearing the path to the creek. The storm had brought down a small pine near the cabin, and Rourke spent an hour sectioning it into manageable pieces while Mara stacked the wood. Her muscles ached, good, honest ache from useful work, and sweat soaked her collar despite the cool air. When they finally stopped for lunch, Rourke surprised her by speaking first. You're stronger than you look. Mara paused in slicing bread. People usually say I'm exactly as strong as I look. Too strong. Unfeminine. People are idiots. He accepted the plate she handed him. Strength's useful. Nothing wrong with useful. It was such a simple statement, delivered without fanfare or false comfort, and it hit Mara harder than any elaborate compliment could have. She sat down across from him, trying to find words that wouldn't expose how much those few sentences meant. My mother used to say I was built for survival, she said finally. She meant it as comfort, I think, but the other women took it as confirmation that I was too coarse for polite society. Your mother's still alive? No, cholera, 3 years ago. My father died when I was 10. Mara stared at her plate. Vernon was the only family left, and he made it clear from the start that taking me in was charity I should be grateful for. Rourke was quiet for a moment. My parents died when I was 15. Fire took the homestead, them with it. I was in town when it happened. His voice was flat, emotionless. Spent the next 10 years working other people's claims, saving every penny. Finally got my own piece of land, worked it for 3 years until those claim jumpers decided they wanted it. The men you killed? Yeah. He pushed back from the table. After the trial, I sold the claim, bought supplies, and came up here. Haven't regretted it. Mara watched him carry his plate to the wash basin. Do you miss it? Having your own land? Building something? I'm building something here. He gestured at the cabin, the clearing, the mountains beyond. It's just mine in a different way. No deed, no taxes, no neighbors trying to tell me what to do with it. No law either, Mara observed. He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. Exactly. The conversation hung between them as they returned to work, but something had shifted again. They were sharing more than space now, more than labor. They were sharing history, the shapes of their separate wounds. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Work, meals, brief exchanges that revealed small pieces of who they'd been before this mountain, this cabin, this strange arrangement. Mara learned that Rourke had taught himself to read from a Bible his mother had treasured, that he'd once wanted to be a carpenter, that he hated beans but ate them anyway because they kept. Rourke learned that Mara had worked in a hotel kitchen before Vernon claimed her, that she could sing, though she rarely did, that she'd never learned to swim because no one had bothered to teach her. The spring deepened into early summer. Rourke showed Mara the garden plot, and together they planted potatoes, carrots, beans, squash. He taught her to recognize the signs of bears and cats, which plants were safe to eat and which would kill you. She taught him that bread didn't have to be dense as a brick if you let it rise properly, that shirts lasted longer if you reinforced the seams, that sometimes it was acceptable to use 3 words when one would do. They developed a rhythm, a wordless understanding of shared space. Mara learned when Rourke needed silence and when he was willing to talk. Rourke learned when Mara's quietness meant contentment and when it meant she was wrestling with something dark. They circled each other like cautious animals, never quite touching, never quite separate. Then came the day that changed everything. Mara was hanging laundry when she heard the horse. Her hand stilled on the wet fabric as the sound grew closer. Not the steady rhythm of Rourke's gelding, but something faster, more erratic. She turned toward the trail just as a man burst into the clearing on a lathered mare, his face flushed and anxious. "Rourke!" he shouted. "Caleb Rourke!" Rourke emerged from the barn, his posture instantly wary. "What is it, Morrison?" The man, Morrison, apparently a trapper from further down the mountain, slid from his horse. "Town's in trouble. Flash flood took out the bridge, and there's a wagon train stranded on the other side. Women, children, supplies they can't afford to lose. They're asking for anyone who knows the high pass to come help."
"Get Sheriff Daniels. He knows the pass. Daniels broke his leg last week. You're the only other man who's crossed it since the snow melted." Morrison glanced at Mara, then back to Rourke. "They're offering good money, $50 a head to guide them through." Rourke's jaw tightened. "I don't go to town." "People could die, Caleb. There's children." Morrison's voice dropped. "I know you've got your reasons for staying up here, but this ain't about you. It's about folks who need help." The silence stretched. Mara could see the war in Rourke's expression, the instinct to refuse warring with something deeper, some core of decency he couldn't quite kill. She stepped forward without thinking. "How long would it take?" she asked. Both men looked at her, surprised. She ignored Morrison's frank appraisal and kept her eyes on Rourke. 2 days there and back," Rourke said slowly. "Maybe 3 if the pass is rough." "Then you should go." Mara crossed her arms. "I can manage here for 3 days." "You sure?" There was something in his eyes, not doubt in her capability, but concern for what being alone might mean for her. "I'm sure." She turned to Morrison. "He'll do it. Give us an hour to get ready." Morrison looked between them, clearly trying to puzzle out their relationship, then shrugged. "Hour it is. I'll water my horse." He led the mare toward the creek, leaving them alone. Rourke closed the distance between them in 3 strides. "You don't have to stay here by yourself. You could come to town, wait at the boarding house." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I'm not going back there. Not ever." "Mara, I can handle 3 days alone, Caleb." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and they both felt the weight of it. "I know where the gun is. I know the rules about bears and fire and not doing anything stupid. I'll be fine." He studied her face for a long moment. "Bar the door at night. Don't go into the woods alone. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling." "I will. There's money in the tin on the shelf. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. If something does," he continued firmly, "take the money and the horse and get somewhere safe. Understand?" Mara's throat tightened at the thought of him not coming back, of this place without his steady presence. "I understand." He nodded, then surprised her by reaching out and gripping her shoulder briefly, the first time he'd deliberately touched her since cutting the ropes in the courthouse. 3 days. I'll be back." True to her word, Mara helped him pack supplies and ready the horse. Morrison watched with barely concealed curiosity, but neither of them paid him any attention. When Rourke finally swung into the saddle, he looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Be careful," she said. "You too." Then he turned the gelding toward the trail, and Morrison followed, and Mara was alone. The silence felt different now. For weeks she'd grown accustomed to the distant sounds of Rourke's work, the knowledge that another person shared this space. Now the clearing seemed vast and empty, the cabin too quiet. She forced herself to move, to continue with the day's tasks. The laundry needed finishing, the garden needed weeding, there were always things that needed doing. But as evening approached and she barred the door from the inside,
Mara felt the first real stirrings of fear. Not of the wilderness, she'd learned to respect it, not fear it, but of what it meant that she cared whether Rourke came back. Somewhere in the past weeks, he'd stopped being the stranger who'd bought her and become something else. Someone else. Someone she trusted. The realization kept her awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the wind in the pines. She'd sworn off trusting men, off believing in anything except her own ability to survive. But Rourke had worn down her defenses without even trying, simply by being exactly what he'd promised to be. Honest, fair, present. 3 days, she told herself. She could manage 3 days. The first day passed uneventfully. Mara worked in the garden, mended a tear in the cabin's chinkin, and practiced with the rifle Rourke had shown her how to load. Her aim was terrible, but the weight of it in her hands was reassuring. She made a simple supper and ate it alone at the table, the empty chair across from her a constant reminder. The second day brought rain again, softer than the storm but steady. Mara stayed inside, organizing supplies and trying not to count the hours. She found herself touching things Rourke had made. The chairs, the shelves, the careful repairs to the quilt on her bed. Each piece was evidence of patience, of skill, of a man who took care with things even when no one was watching. She was kneading bread dough when she heard the growl, low, rumbling, coming from somewhere near the cabin. Mara froze, her hand still buried in the dough. The sound came again, closer now, followed by a heavy snuffling. Her heart kicked into a gallop. Bear. It had to be a bear. Moving slowly, she wiped her hands and crossed to the rifle. Her hands shook as she checked the load. It was ready. Rourke had made sure of that. The growling circled the cabin, investigating. Mara remembered his instructions. Bears usually leave if you make noise, make yourself big. But if it's a sow with cubs, or if it's hungry enough, noise won't matter. She had no way of knowing which this was. The scratching started at the door, claws scraping against wood. Mara backed toward the fireplace, the rifle raised, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The bar on the door was solid. Rourke had built it to keep bears out. But the scratching continued, testing, persistent. Then it stopped. Mara waited, every muscle tense, the rifle aimed at the door. Silence. Long minutes of silence. Finally, she heard the heavy footsteps moving away, crashing through the undergrowth toward the creek. She didn't lower the rifle for another hour. When her arms finally started shaking from the strain, she set it down and sank into a chair. Her whole body trembled with released adrenaline. Nothing had happened. The bear had moved on. The door had held. She was safe. But the encounter had shaken something loose in her, some understanding of how fragile safety really was. That night she slept with the rifle beside her bed and the bar firmly in place. The third day dawned clear and cold. Mara rose early, unrested, and went through the motions of breakfast without tasting anything. He should be back today. Maybe by noon, maybe by evening, but today, unless something had gone wrong. Unless the pass had claimed him, or the wagon train had needed more help, or... She cut off the spiral of worry and threw herself into work. The garden needed water. The cabin needed sweeping. She needed to stop imagining disasters and trust that Caleb Rourke, who had survived 5 years alone in these mountains, could handle a simple guide job. Noon came and went. The sun climbed toward its peak. Mara sat on the cabin steps, shelling peas into a bowl and straining to hear hoofbeats over the wind. When she finally heard them, the relief was so intense it made her dizzy. Rourke appeared at the edge of the clearing, sitting straight in the saddle, looking whole and unharmed. Mara set down the bowl and stood, willing herself not to run to him like a child. He dismounted and led the horse toward the barn, and only when he was closer did she see the exhaustion in his face. "You made it," she said unnecessarily. "Told you I would." He started unbuckling the saddle. "How are things here?" "Fine. Quiet." She hesitated. "A bear came around yesterday. It left." His hands stilled on the leather. "You see it?" "No, just heard it. It scratched at the door for a while, then moved on." Rourke turned to look at her fully, his eyes searching her face. "You scared?" "Terrified." Mara lifted her chin. "But I didn't do anything stupid. Just waited it out, like you said." Something that might have been pride crossed his expression.
Good. He returned to tending the horse. The wagon train made it through. 23 people, including 7 children under 10, would have lost half their supplies if the crossing had failed. You saved them. I guided them. They saved themselves. He hauled the saddle off and carried it into the barn. When he emerged, he looked at her again. You really were all right here? Alone? Mara understood what he was really asking, whether being alone had brought back the fear, the memories of helplessness. I was all right. I even liked it, in a strange way, knowing I could handle it. You can handle more than you think. He walked past her toward the cabin, then paused. I miss the coffee. You make it better than I do. It was such a small thing, such a simple admission, but it settled something in Mara's chest. He'd missed something about being here, about her being here. I'll make some now, she said. They fell back into their rhythm as if he'd never left, but something had changed. The silence between them felt different now, not the careful distance of strangers, but the comfortable quiet of people who didn't need words to fill space. Mara caught herself watching him more openly, noticing the way he moved, the rare smiles that occasionally crossed his face, the careful way he handled everything from tools to animals to the tin cup she handed him. And she caught him watching her too, not with hunger or calculation, but with something that looked almost like wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. A week passed, then 2. The garden flourished, the days grew longer and warmer. They worked side by side, spoke more freely, shared the small details of daily life. Rourke taught Mara to fish in the creek, laughing when she shrieked the first time a trout slipped through her fingers. Mara taught Rourke that shirts could have 2 buttons at the collar instead of 1, making them easier to get on and off. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Rourke broke the comfortable silence. You ever think about leaving? Mara's breath caught. Do you want me to leave? No. He said it quickly, firmly. That's not what I meant. I just wondered if you ever thought about going back. To civilization, to a life that's easier than this. She considered the question seriously. No, she said finally. I don't think about leaving. This is the first place I've ever felt like I could breathe. She turned to look at him. Do you think about leaving? Sometimes I think about what it would be like to go somewhere no one knows my name, start completely fresh. He met her eyes. But then I remember that I'd be the same person in a different place. The past doesn't wash off just because you change location. Maybe not, Mara agreed. But you can build something new on top of it. Make it part of the foundation instead of the whole structure. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. When'd you get so wise? When I had time to think without someone telling me I was thinking wrong. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. You gave me that, time and space and silence to figure out who I am, without all the noise. And who are you? It was the most personal question he'd ever asked her. Mara took a breath, then another, searching for truth. I'm someone who's stronger than she knew, someone who can survive hard things, someone who's still learning that survival isn't the same as living. Rourke nodded slowly. I'm still learning that too. They sat in silence as the light faded and the first stars appeared. The night air turned cool, carrying the scent of pine and creek water. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Mara felt something unfold in her chest, something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope of someone drowning, but the quiet kind that suggested tomorrow might be better than today, that there might be more to life than just enduring until the next sunrise. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me. Not what everyone else saw, but me. Rourke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Same to you. They stayed there until the cold drove them inside, until Mara's teeth started chattering and Rourke's hands grew stiff. As they prepared for bed, moving around each other in the familiar dance of shared space, Mara felt the truth settle over her like a weight. She was falling in love with him, not the desperate attachment of someone grateful for rescue, but the real thing, respect and admiration, and the deep desire to know every part of him, even the broken pieces. Maybe especially the broken pieces. It terrified her. Love made you vulnerable,
gave someone else the power to destroy you. She'd watched her mother waste away after her father died, had seen women in the orphanage cling to men who treated them like property. Love was dangerous. But as she lay in her small room, listening to Rourke move around the cabin before retreating to his own space, Mara acknowledged that it was already too late for fear. The thing she was afraid of had already happened. She loved him. Now she just had to figure out what to do about it. The answer came sooner than she expected, delivered on the back of the summer's first real heat wave. The temperature climbed day after day until the air shimmered and even the shade offered little relief. Rourke spent his days checking the creek levels, worried about fire. Mara worked in the garden during the cool morning hours and retreated inside when the heat became unbearable. On the 5th day of the heat, Rourke came back from checking his trapline, looking drawn and gray. He made it to the table before he swayed, catching himself on the chair. Mara was across the room in an instant. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just hot." But his skin was clammy when she touched his arm, and his eyes weren't quite focused. "You're dehydrated. When's the last time you drank water?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Mara guided him into the chair and fetched the canteen, making him drink in small sips. She dampened a cloth and pressed it to the back of his neck, watching color slowly return to his face. "Stupid," he muttered. "No better than to skip water in heat like this." "Everyone makes mistakes." She refilled the canteen. "Stay here. I'll get more water from the creek." "Mara, stay." She used the voice she'd perfected in the hotel kitchen, the one that made grown men listen. "I'll be back in 10 minutes. She grabbed the buckets and headed for the creek, moving quickly through the familiar path. The water ran lower than she'd ever seen it, but it was still clear and cold. She filled both buckets and turned back toward the cabin. That's when she heard the crack. The sound came from upstream, sharp and wrong. Mara looked up just in time to see the wall of water bearing down on her. Flash flood. Her mind registered it even as her body froze. The heat had melted snowpack somewhere high in the mountains, sending a surge of water down the creek bed. She had maybe 3 seconds. She ran. The water caught her anyway, hitting her legs with the force of a physical blow and sweeping her off her feet. Mara went under, tumbling, choking, her hands grasping for anything solid. Her shoulder slammed into a rock and pain exploded through her arm, but she used it to push up, break the surface, gasp for air. A branch. There. She lunged for it, caught it, held on with every ounce of strength she possessed. The water raged around her, trying to tear her loose, but she locked her arms and refused to let go. Her muscles screamed. The current pulled at her legs, seeking to drag her downstream toward rocks and rapids and death. Then hands grabbed her wrists. Rourke hauled her toward the bank with raw strength, fighting the current, his face set in lines of absolute determination. Mara's grip on the branch faltered, but his didn't, pulling her up, out, onto solid ground where they both collapsed in the mud. "You all right?" He was already running hands over her arms, her head, checking for injuries. "My shoulder." Mara tried to sit up and gasped as pain lanced through her left side. Rourke's jaw tightened. "Can you stand?" She nodded, and he helped her up, supporting most of her weight as they stumbled back to the cabin. Once inside, he settled her in a chair and began carefully examining her shoulder. His hands were gentle but thorough, pressing along the bone, testing the joint. "Not broken," he said finally, "but badly bruised. You hit something hard." "Rock." Mara's teeth were chattering despite the heat. Shock, probably. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful." "Stop." He crouched in front of her, his hands still on her arms. "You saved my life today. I would have gone for water myself in an hour, and I wouldn't have had the strength to fight that current. Your quick thinking got you to that branch. You pulled me out. After you saved yourself." His grip tightened slightly. "Don't apologize for being strong, Mara. Not to me. Not to anyone." She stared at him, at the intensity in his gray eyes, at the way he looked at her like she was something precious. Without thinking, she reached up with her good arm and touched his face, feeling the rough texture of his beard under her palm. "I was so scared," she whispered. "Not of dying, of never seeing you again." Rourke went very still. "Mara, I know what the arrangement is. I know what we agreed. But I can't pretend anymore that this is just business, that you're just someone I work for." The words spilled out, raw and true. "You're more than that.
You've been more than that for weeks now. You could have died today, he said roughly. I heard the water, came running, and when I saw you go under, he broke off, his expression stark. I can't lose you. I didn't know that until today. But I can't. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying? Instead of answering, Rourke leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, almost careful, his lips warm against hers. Mara's breath caught, and for a moment she froze, overwhelmed by the enormity of it. This man who kept the world at arm's length, choosing to close the distance. Then her good arm came up to curve around his neck, and she kissed him back with all the longing she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. When they finally broke apart, Rourke rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. I'm saying that somewhere between buying you out of that courthouse and now, you stopped being an arrangement and became the best part of my day. Mara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. I don't know how to do this. No one's ever wanted me like this before. Good. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Because I don't know how to do this either. All I know is that when I thought I might lose you today, I realized I've already lost the ability to imagine this place without you in it. She kissed him again, pouring everything she couldn't say into it, gratitude and fear, and the terrifying vulnerability of letting someone matter this much. He responded with a tenderness that made her chest ache, his hands careful on her face, mindful of her injured shoulder. When they separated this time, Rourke stood and helped her to her feet. You need rest. That shoulder's going to hurt worse tomorrow. I'm fine, Mara protested, but even as she said it, exhaustion crashed over her like a second wave. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and drained. Rourke guided her to her room and helped her sit on the bed. I'll make willow bark tea for the pain. Try to sleep. Caleb. She caught his hand before he could leave. What happens now? He looked down at their joined hands, his expression unreadable. Now we figure it out. Together. He squeezed her fingers gently. Rest. We'll talk when you're not half dead from shock. He was right. Her body was already shutting down, demanding the recovery it needed. Mara lay back on the bed, and the last thing she registered before sleep claimed her was the sound of Rourke moving around the cabin, solid and real and here. She woke to darkness and the smell of something cooking. Her shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, and when she tried to sit up, the room spun. She lay back down, breathing carefully through the nausea, waiting for the world to steady. Easy. Rourke appeared in the doorway, backlit by firelight. Don't rush it. What time is it? Past midnight. You've been asleep for 8 hours. He came closer, carrying a cup that steamed. Willow bark tea. It'll help with the pain. Mara struggled to sit up, and he set the cup aside to help her, propping pillows behind her back. The movement sent fresh agony through her shoulder, and she couldn't suppress a gasp. I know. Rourke's voice was gentle. It's going to be bad for a few days. You took a hard hit. He handed her the tea. Drink all of it. Tastes like hell, but it works. He wasn't lying about the taste. Mara forced it down anyway, grateful for the warmth that spread through her chest. Rourke sat on the edge of the bed, watching her with an intensity that made her hyper-aware of every breath. You should be sleeping too, she said. Couldn't. He rubbed his face. Every time I close my eyes, I see you going under. See myself being too late, too slow. His jaw tightened. I've faced down bears and cats and men with murder in their eyes, but watching that water take you, that was the most afraid I've ever been. Mara set the empty cup aside and reached for his hand with her good arm. I'm here. I'm all right. This time. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. But what about next time? What if there's a fire, or you fall, or... He broke off, shaking his head. I can't protect you from everything up here. Can't promise you'll always be safe. I don't need you to protect me from everything. Mara tightened her grip. I need you to trust that I'm strong enough to handle what comes, to be my partner, not my guard. Something shifted in his expression. Partner. If that's what you want. Her heart hammered. If this is more than just, it's more. He said it firmly, no hesitation. It's been more for a while now. I was just too stubborn to admit it. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles.
You terrify me, Mara Ellison. You walked into my life and turned everything sideways, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I know I don't want to do it without you. Mara felt tears slip down her cheeks before she could stop them. I love you, she whispered. I didn't mean to, tried not to, but I do. Rourke's breath caught. For a long moment he just stared at her, and she saw something crack open in his eyes, wonder and fear and a hunger so deep it made her ache. Then he leaned forward and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. I love you too, he said against her skin. Don't know when it happened, but it did. You're mine, and I'm yours. And that's the truth of it. They stayed like that, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other's air. Eventually, Rourke pulled back and stood. You need more sleep. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Stay. The word came out before Mara could second guess it. Please, I don't want to be alone. He hesitated, and she saw him war with propriety, with the careful boundaries they'd maintained. Then he nodded. All right, but I'm staying on top of the quilt, and we're just sleeping. You're hurt, and I won't. I know. Mara shifted carefully to make room. I trust you. Those 3 words seemed to undo him more than anything else she could have said. He removed his boots and lay down beside her, careful not to jostle her injured side. Mara curled against him as much as her shoulder allowed, her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. This feels like a dream, she murmured. Like I'm going to wake up back in that courthouse. Not a dream. His arm came around her, solid and warm. You're here, and you're safe, and I'm not letting you go. She believed him. Against all odds, against every lesson life had taught her about trusting men, she believed him. And surrounded by his warmth, listening to his breathing slow and deepen, Mara finally let herself relax completely. She woke to sunlight and the realization that Rourke was already up. She could hear him moving around the main room, the familiar sounds of morning routine. Her shoulder hurt less than it had in the night, still painful but manageable. She sat up carefully, testing her range of motion, pleased to find she could move her arm without wanting to scream. When she emerged from her room, she found Rourke at the stove, cooking eggs. He looked up when he heard her, and his expression softened. How's the shoulder? Better? She crossed to him, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek. The casual intimacy of it felt both strange and perfectly right. Thank you for staying. Thank you for asking. He plated the eggs and brought them to the table. We need to talk about what happens next. Mara's stomach tightened, but she sat down across from him. All right. Rourke pushed his eggs around his plate, clearly organizing his thoughts. This arrangement we had. You work, I provide, we stay out of each other's way. That's done. Can't go back to that, and I don't want to. Neither do I. Good. He met her eyes. But I need you to understand what you're choosing. This isn't a town with neighbors and society and normal life. It's isolation and hard work and danger. If you stay, you're choosing that too. I know what I'm choosing. Mara leaned forward. I'm choosing a life where I'm valued for my strength instead of mocked for it, where I can work hard and know it matters, where I can be myself without pretending to be smaller, quieter, less. She paused. I'm choosing you, all of it. Relief flooded his face. Then we do this right. No more separate rooms, no more pretending this is just convenience. We're together, properly together, and everyone who needs to know will know it. Everyone being who, exactly? The bears? He smiled despite himself. Smart ass. I meant when we go to town for supplies. I'm not hiding you, or what you mean to me. The thought of returning to town made Mara's chest tighten, but she pushed through the fear. When do we need to go? Not for a few weeks yet. He reached across the table to take her hand. And when we do, we'll go together. You're not facing those people alone. They spent the next days settling into their new reality. Rourke moved his things into Mara's room, the larger of the two, and they transformed his old space into proper storage. They worked side by side as always, but now the touches were deliberate instead of accidental, the glances loaded with meaning. In the evenings, they sat together by the fire, Mara leaning against Rourke's shoulder while he read aloud from the books he'd accumulated over the years. It should have felt rushed, this sudden shift from careful distance to intimacy. But instead it felt like coming home, like pieces finally sliding into place after months of patient waiting. One night, as they lay in bed listening to rain patter against the roof, Mara asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Do you think we should get married?" Rourke went still. "Do you want to?" "I don't know." She traced patterns on his chest. "Part of me thinks it doesn't matter. We know what we are to each other, and that's enough. But part of me worries that without it, I'm still just the woman you bought. That people will see me as your property instead of your partner. You're not my property. You never were." His voice was fierce. "That paper the judge signed doesn't mean a damn thing compared to the choice we're making now." "I know that. But does anyone else?" Mara pushed up on her elbow to look at him. "I'm trying to think practically. If something happened to you, I'd have no legal claim to this place, no protection. And if something happened to me, nothing's going to happen to you. You can't promise that any more than I can promise nothing will happen to you." She touched his face. "I'm not saying we have to. I'm saying we should think about it." Rourke was quiet for a long time, his hand stroking her hair. "My parents were married," he said finally. "Stood up in front of a preacher and the whole town, made all the promises. But it wasn't the ceremony that made them partners. It was the way they chose each other every single day, the way they worked together, trusted each other, built a life together. So you don't think it matters?" "I think it matters if it matters to you." He pulled her closer. "If you want the legal protection, the public declaration, the ceremony, I'll give you all of it. But if you're asking whether I need a piece of paper to know you're mine and I'm yours, the answer is no. I already know." Mara absorbed this, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need." He kissed her temple. "We've got nothing but time." But time, as it turned out, had other plans. They were working in the garden 2 weeks later when Rourke suddenly went rigid, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt. Mara looked up from the carrots she was thinning to see 3 men emerging from the tree line on horseback. "Get behind me," Rourke said quietly. Mara stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands, her heart picking up speed. The men looked rough even by frontier standards, unshaven, their clothes stained and worn. The one in front had a scar running from his eye to his jaw, and his smile showed missing teeth. "Well, well," Scar said, reining in his horse. "Caleb Rourke, heard you were still hiding up here." "I'm not hiding." Rourke's voice was flat, dangerous. "And you're trespassing. Turn around and leave." "Now, that's not very hospitable." Scar's eyes slid to Mara, and his smile widened. "Especially when we came all this way. Heard you had yourself a woman now. Didn't believe it at first, figured you were too mean for anyone to stomach. But I guess some women will take anything if the alternative's worse." Mara felt Rourke tense beside her. She put a hand on his arm, a silent plea for him to stay calm. "Last warning," Rourke said. "Leave. Now." "We're not here to cause trouble." The second man spoke up, younger than Scar, but with the same hard edge. "Just heard about that guide fee you earned. $50 a head for 23 people. That's over $1,000. Seems wrong for one man to keep all that when there's folks who could use it." "The guide fee went to supplies for the wagon train. I didn't keep a penny." Rourke's hand remained on his knife. "And even if I had, it wouldn't be any of your business." "See, that's where you're wrong." Scar dismounted and the other 2 followed. "Everything on this mountain is our business. We work this territory, and we don't take kindly to outsiders coming in and taking opportunities that should be ours. You want guide work, go to town, and offer it." Rourke shifted his position slightly, putting himself more fully between Mara and the men. "This conversation's over." "Not quite." Scar took a step forward. "See? We figure you owe us. Call it a tax for using our territory. We'll take payment in cash or—" His eyes slid to Mara again. "Other arrangements." The implication hit Mara like a fist to the gut. Beside her, Rourke went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. "You've got 3 seconds to get back on those horses," Rourke said, his voice dropping to something barely human. 1. "Now, Caleb, let's be reasonable." 2. "We're just talking here." 3. Rourke moved. Mara had seen him work with controlled precision for months, chopping wood, skinning game, building and repairing with careful attention to detail. But this was different. This was violence distilled to its purest form, every movement economical and devastating. He crossed the distance to Scar in 2 strides, his knife appearing as if by magic. The blade pressed against Scar's throat before the man could even raise his hands. "My woman is off limits," Rourke said softly. "My home is off limits. My mountain is off limits. You ever come up here again, you ever even think about coming up here again, and I won't stop with a warning. Are we clear?" Scar's eyes were wide, his breathing shallow. "Clear." "Say it again." "We won't come back. We're clear." Rourke held him there for another long moment, then stepped back. "Get out of my sight." The 3 men scrambled for their horses, nearly tripping over each other in their haste. Scar paused once in the saddle, his hand moving toward something at his belt. A gun, Mara realized with ice-cold clarity. "Caleb!" she shouted. Rourke spun, his knife already in motion. It flew through the air and embedded itself in a tree trunk an inch from Scar's hand. The message was clear. "I could have hit you if I wanted to." Scar's face went white. He jerked his horse around and kicked it into a gallop, his companions following. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the trees, leaving behind ringing silence. Rourke stood motionless for several heartbeats, his breathing controlled but his hands trembling slightly. Then he crossed to the tree and pulled his knife free, wiping the blade on his pants before sheathing it. Mara's legs felt like water. She sat down hard on the ground, not trusting them to hold her. "You all right?" Rourke was beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders. "I think so." She looked up at him. "Are they going to come back?" "No." He said it with absolute certainty. "They're cowards. They only pick fights they know they can win, and they know they can't win against me." His jaw tightened. "But word will spread that you're here, that I've got something worth protecting, and that might draw the wrong kind of attention. So what do we do?" Rourke helped her to her feet, his expression grim. "We prepare. Make this place more secure. And we go to town sooner than planned. I want people to know you're under my protection, that anyone who touches you answers to me." The thought of returning to Willow Creek, of facing the people who'd laughed at her humiliation, made Mara's stomach churn. But she understood the necessity. In this harsh country, reputation mattered, fear mattered, and Caleb Rourke needed to make it abundantly clear that she was his to defend. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow." He scanned the tree line, still tense. "We'll make it quick. Get supplies. Show our faces. Make the point clear. Then we come home." That night, Rourke taught Mara to shoot properly. They stood in the clearing as the sun set, and he positioned her, corrected her stance, guided her hands on the rifle. His patience was infinite, his instructions clear and calm despite the tension she could feel humming through him. "Breathe out slowly," he murmured against her ear. "Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Like you're trying not to startle it." Mara did as he said, and the rifle kicked against her shoulder. The bottle she'd been aiming at exploded in a satisfying spray of glass. "Good." Pride colored his voice. "Again." They practiced until the light faded and Mara's shoulder ached from the recoil. By the end, she could hit the target more often than not expert level, but competent enough to defend herself if needed. "You're a natural," Rourke said as they cleaned the rifle together. "I'm motivated." Mara met his eyes. "I won't be helpless, Caleb. I won't be someone you have to constantly protect. I'll learn to protect myself, protect us both if it comes to it." He cupped her face in his hands. "I know. That's one of the things I love about you. You're always moving forward, always getting stronger." He kissed her softly. "But it's all right to lean on me sometimes, too. That's what partners do." They made love that night with a desperate intensity, both of them needing the reassurance of touch, of closeness, of life affirming itself in the most primal way. Afterward, as Mara lay in Rourke's arms, listening to his heartbeat slow, she made a decision. "I want to marry you," she said into the darkness. His arms tightened around her. "You sure?" "Yes." She pushed up to look at him. "Not because of what happened today, or because I'm afraid. Because I want the whole world to know that I chose you and you chose me. That we're building something real and permanent and worth defending." Rourke searched her face in the dim light. Then he smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face. Then we'll do it right. Proper ceremony, witnesses, the whole thing. In town? In town.
He pulled her close again. We'll show them all exactly what you mean to me. They left at dawn, riding double on Rourke's gelding.
The town was only 6 miles, but it felt like 100. Mara's stomach twisted tighter with each step, memories of the courthouse flooding back. She tried to focus on the solid warmth of Rourke's chest against her back, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. "Stay close to me," Rourke murmured as Willow Creek came into view. "Don't let anyone separate us." The town looked exactly as Mara remembered, rough, dusty, clinging to existence in this unforgiving valley. People turned to stare as they rode down the main street, whispers following in their wake. Mara forced herself to sit straight, to meet the curious gazes with her chin up. She was not the same terrified woman who'd stood on that auction platform. She was Caleb Rourke's partner, and she would not be ashamed. Rourke stopped in front of the general store and dismounted, then helped Mara down. His hand found hers immediately, fingers lacing together in a clear declaration of intent. Together, they walked into the store. The shopkeeper, a portly man named Henderson, looked up from his ledger, and his eyes widened. "Rourke, didn't expect to see you so soon after—" He broke off, noticing Mara. "Ma'am, we need supplies," Rourke said, "and we need to file a marriage intention with the county clerk." Henderson's eyebrows shot up. "Marriage intention? That's what I said." Rourke's voice was mild, but there was steel underneath. "Problem with that?" "No, no problem at all." Henderson bustled around the counter. "Clerk's office is down the street. Congratulations to you both." They spent the next hour making their rounds. Supplies at the general store, paperwork at the clerk's office, a stop at the blacksmith to order some tools Rourke needed. At each location, the reaction was the same: surprise, speculation, and careful neutrality. No one dared comment directly, not with Caleb Rourke standing right there. But Mara heard the whispers anyway, wondered what she did to catch him. Probably grateful for any man willing to take her. Can't imagine those two together. She let the words roll off her, refusing to let them find purchase. These people didn't matter. Their opinions didn't matter. The only opinion that mattered was Caleb's, and he'd made his choice clear. They were leaving the clerk's office when Vernon Pritchard appeared. He looked worse than Mara remembered, thinner, with the jaundiced pallor of someone who spent more time with whiskey than food. His eyes, when they landed on her, filled with malicious satisfaction. "Well, well, the cow and her keeper," Vernon's voice was loud enough to carry. "Heard you two were playing house up in the mountains. Must be convenient, Rourke, having someone who owes you everything." Rourke's hand tightened on Mara's, but his expression remained neutral. "Walk away, Pritchard." "Why should I? Got a right to speak to my own kin." Vernon stepped closer, and Mara could smell the alcohol on him. "You doing all right up there, Mara? He treating you decent, or is it just another kind of ownership?" Something in Mara snapped. She'd spent her whole life swallowing insults, letting people like Vernon define her worth. Not anymore. "You sold me," she said clearly, her voice steady. "You dragged me into a courthouse and let them auction me off like livestock to settle your gambling debts. You don't get to pretend you care about my well-being now." Vernon's face reddened. "I gave you a home when you had nothing. You gave me a roof and enough food to keep me working. That's not generosity, it's exploitation." Mara stepped forward, and Vernon actually stepped back. "Caleb treats me with respect. He values my work, my strength, my partnership. That's more than you or anyone else in this town ever did." "Partnership," Vernon sneered. "That what you call it when a man—" He didn't get to finish. Rourke moved faster than thought, his hand fisting in Vernon's shirt and slamming him back against the wall of the building. "You can insult me all you want," Rourke said, his voice deadly quiet. "But you speak about my future wife with respect, or you don't speak about her at all. Understand?" Vernon's eyes bulged. "Wife? We're getting married, properly, legally, in front of witnesses." Rourke leaned closer. "And when we do, she'll be a Rourke, under my protection, permanently. So if you're thinking of causing trouble, think again." He released Vernon, who slumped against the wall, gasping. Rourke took Mara's hand again and guided her toward their horse, his stride unhurried despite the crowd that had gathered to watch. They were almost to the gelding when Judge Bickford stepped into their path. "Rourke, Miss Ellison." The judge's expression was calculating. "Heard you're planning to marry. Interesting development. Is there a point to this conversation?" Rourke's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Just wondering if the lady is making this choice freely." Bickford looked at Mara. "You understand you're not obligated to stay with him. That original transaction can be nullified if—" "I choose to be here," Mara interrupted. "I choose him. No one's forcing me, no one's coercing me. This is my decision, freely made." Bickford studied her for a long moment. "Very well. The county will process your marriage intention. You'll need to wait 30 days, then you can have any minister or judge perform the ceremony." 30 days, Rourke confirmed. "We'll be back." They rode out of town in silence, the whispers and stares following them until they left the last building behind. Only when they were back in the trees, the town fading behind them, did Mara finally let herself breathe. "You all right?" Rourke asked. "Better than all right?" She leaned back against him. "I faced them. Stood up to Vernon. Didn't let them make me small." "You were magnificent." She could hear the smile in his voice. "The look on Vernon's face when you called him out, that was beautiful." They rode in comfortable silence until the cabin came into view. As they dismounted, Mara turned to Rourke. 30 days, she said. 30 days. He pulled her close. "Then you'll be Mara Rourke, and everyone in this territory will know it." The name settled over her like a promise. Mara Rourke, a woman who chose her own life, her own future, her own name. A woman who was loved not despite her strength, but because of it. She could hardly wait. The 30 days stretched ahead like a promise and a test. Mara threw herself into preparing for the wedding with an intensity that surprised even her. She'd never imagined herself as a bride. Had stopped allowing herself such dreams years ago when it became clear that women like her didn't get fairy tale endings. But this wasn't a fairy tale. This was real, hard-won, built on shared work and honest truth. She started with her dress. The fabric in the chest included a length of cream-colored cotton that Rourke admitted he'd bought on impulse years ago, thinking he might make curtains but never getting around to it. Mara spread it across the table, measuring and cutting with careful precision. She'd never made anything this important before, and her hands trembled as she began the first seams. Rourke watched from his chair by the fire, mending a harness. "You don't have to make it fancy," he said. "I'd marry you in what you're wearing now." "I know." Mara smoothed the fabric. "But I want something that's mine, something I made with my own hands for this exact moment." She glanced at him. "Is that foolish?" "No." His voice was soft. "It's human. Nothing wrong with wanting something beautiful to mark something important." She worked on the dress in the evenings, her stitches small and even, while Rourke read aloud or worked on his own projects. Sometimes he'd look up and catch her eye, and the warmth in his gaze made her fingers fumble. The anticipation built between them like static before a storm, not urgent or desperate, but patient and sure. 10 days before the wedding, the first real trouble came. Mara was hanging laundry when she heard horses again. Her stomach dropped, memories of Scar and his men flooding back. But when she looked toward the trail, she saw Morrison from town, along with 2 other men she didn't recognize. Their faces were grim. Rourke emerged from the barn, his hand already on his knife. "Morrison, what's wrong?" "Need your help, Caleb." Morrison dismounted, and Mara could see exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "There's been a cave-in at the silver mine up near Crimson Peak. At least 8 men trapped, maybe more. We're organizing rescue teams, but most of the men with mining experience are either trapped themselves or too old to make the climb." "I'm not a miner," Rourke said. "No, but you know those mountains better than anyone. You know the caves, the shafts, the way the rock sits." Morrison's voice was urgent. "We need someone who can guide us through the back passages, someone who won't panic underground. You're the best chance those men have." Rourke's jaw tightened. Mara could see the war in his eyes, his instinct to refuse battling against the knowledge that men's lives hung in the balance. "How long?" he asked. "Don't know. Could be a day, could be 3. Depends on what we find." Morrison glanced at Mara. "I know the timing's bad with the wedding coming up." "The wedding can wait." Mara stepped forward. Those men can't. She looked at Rourke. You have to go. Mara, you have to go, she repeated firmly. I'll be fine here. We have 10 days before the ceremony. That's plenty of time for you to help and get back. Rourke crossed to her, taking her hands. Are you sure? After what happened last time I left, I'm sure. She squeezed his fingers. Those men need you. Their families need you. I can handle a few days alone. She managed to smile. I'm stronger than I used to be, remember? Something that might have been pride crossed his face. You are. He turned to Morrison. Give me an hour to pack gear and get ready. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Rourke gathered rope, lanterns, tools, supplies. Mara packed food and extra clothing, checking and rechecking everything. When it was finally time for him to leave, she walked with him to where Morrison and the others waited. Be careful, she said, her throat tight. Don't take unnecessary risks. Those men need you alive, not dead alongside them. I'll be careful. He pulled her close, heedless of their audience, and kissed her soundly. Bar the door, keep the rifle close. If anyone comes around who makes you nervous, don't hesitate to use it. I won't. I love you. He said it clearly, loudly enough for the others to hear, claiming her, protecting her even as he left. I'll be back as soon as I can. I love you too. Mara stepped back, forcing herself to let go. Bring them home safe. She watched until they disappeared into the trees, then returned to the cabin and did exactly as he'd instructed. She barred the door, loaded the rifle, and settled in to wait. The first day wasn't so bad. Mara kept busy with chores, worked on her dress, tended the garden, but as evening fell and she sat alone by the fire, the silence pressed in on her. She found herself straining to hear hoofbeats, jumping at every small sound. The cabin felt too big without Rourke's presence filling it. The second day was worse. Mara's imagination conjured 1,000 disasters, cave-ins, falls, accidents. She tried to stay rational, to remember that Rourke was capable and careful, but fear had its own logic. She worked until exhaustion claimed her, then slept fitfully, waking at every creak and whisper of wind. The third day brought a visitor. Mara heard the horse mid-morning and grabbed the rifle, her heart hammering. But when she peered through the window, she saw not Scar or his men, but a woman, older, gray-haired, sitting ramrod straight in her saddle. She looked vaguely familiar, though Mara couldn't place her. The woman dismounted and approached the cabin. Miss Ellison? I know you're in there. I'm not here to cause trouble, just want to talk. Mara debated ignoring her, but something in the woman's voice sounded genuine. She cracked the door open, rifle visible. Who are you? Judith Morrison, Tom's wife. The woman gestured toward the trail. My husband's with Caleb at the mine. I thought you might appreciate some company, being alone up here. Mara studied her, looking for deception. Judith Morrison had kind eyes and work-worn hands, and her expression held only concern. Slowly, Mara lowered the rifle and opened the door wider. Come in. Judith entered carrying a basket that she set on the table. Brought some fresh bread and preserves. Figured you might be getting low on supplies with Caleb gone. She looked around the cabin, taking in the neatness, the half-finished wedding dress on the chair. It's lovely up here. Peaceful. It is. Mara set the rifle aside but stayed wary. Why are you really here, Mrs. Morrison? Judith, please. The older woman sat down at the table. And I'm here because I wanted to meet the woman who finally got Caleb Rourke to come down from his mountain. Also because I thought you might need someone to talk to. Waiting alone is harder than going sometimes. The understanding in her voice cracked something in Mara's chest. She sat down across from Judith, her hands clasped tight on the table. Have you heard anything about the rescue? Tom sent word yesterday. They found the trapped men, all 8 alive, praise be. But the passage out is tricky, and they're working to shore it up before they try to move anyone. Caleb's been invaluable, apparently. He knows those caves like the back of his hand. Relief flooded through Mara so intensely she felt dizzy. They're alive. All of them. All of them. Judith reached across to pat her hand. Tom says if anyone can get them out safely, it's Caleb. He's got a steady head in a crisis. They talked for over an hour. Judith told stories about the town, about her own marriage to Tom 40 years ago, about the harsh realities of frontier life.
She asked Mara about her past, but didn't press when Mara's answers were brief. When she finally stood to leave, she surprised Mara by pulling her into a brief, firm hug. "You're good for him," Judith said. "I've known Caleb since he first came to this territory, and I've never seen him at peace. But that day he came through town with you, riding to the mine. He looked like a man who had something worth coming back to." She smiled. "That's a gift, Mara. Don't underestimate it." After Judith left, Mara returned to her dress with renewed energy. The fabric took shape under her hands. Simple lines, practical construction, but beautiful in its honesty. Like everything else in her life now, it was real and sturdy and made to last. Rourke returned on the fourth day, just as the sun was setting. Mara heard the horse and flew to the door, her heart soaring when she saw him riding into the clearing. He looked exhausted, covered in rock dust, moving stiffly, but whole and unhurt. She met him at the barn, and he slid from the saddle into her arms. They held each other for a long moment, not speaking, just breathing together. "All 8? Mara asked finally. "All 8. Got them out yesterday, but I stayed to help shore up the main passages so it won't happen again." He pulled back to look at her. "You all right? Any trouble?" "No trouble." Judith Morrison came to visit, brought bread. Mara touched his face, needing the confirmation of his solidity. "I'm fine. You need food and sleep." "I need you." He kissed her, tasting of dust and exhaustion and relief. "Missed you. Even in the middle of everything, I kept thinking about getting back here, to you." They went inside together, and Mara heated water for him to wash while she prepared a simple meal. He told her about the rescue, the careful navigation of unstable passages, the delicate work of widening gaps without causing further collapse, the moment when they finally brought the last man out into sunlight. His voice was matter-of-fact, but she could hear the weight of it, the responsibility he'd carried. "You saved their lives," she said. "We saved their lives. It took 20 men working around the clock." He dried his hands. "But yeah, they're alive because we didn't give up. The town will remember that." "Don't care what the town remembers." He pulled her close. "I care that I came back to you in one piece, that we still have 6 days before the wedding, that I get to marry you and spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you." Mara's eyes burned. "You already deserve me. We deserve each other." They spent the next days in a kind of golden suspension, savoring the anticipation. Mara finished her dress and hung it carefully in the wardrobe. Rourke built a small shelf for their combined belongings, a physical symbol of 2 lives merging. They talked about the future, whether to expand the cabin, how to improve the garden, dreams that had seemed impossible just months ago. 3 days before the wedding, Rourke surprised her at breakfast. "I have something for you." He set a small wooden box on the table. Mara opened it carefully and gasped. Inside was a ring, simple gold slightly tarnished with a tiny stone that caught the light. "Caleb, it was my mother's." His voice was rough. "Only thing that survived the fire. I've been carrying it for 15 years, never thought I'd have a reason to give it to someone." He took it from the box and held it up. "It's not fancy, but it's real, like us." Mara's vision blurred with tears. "It's perfect." "Not yet." He slipped it onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Now it's perfect." She launched herself at him, nearly knocking over her chair, and kissed him with all the love and gratitude and fierce joy surging through her. He caught her easily, lifting her off her feet, both of them laughing against each other's mouths. When they finally separated, breathless and grinning, Rourke cupped her face in his hands. "3 more days," he said. "Then everyone will know you're mine." "I'm already yours." Mara covered his hands with hers. "But I'm ready for the whole world to know it too." The day before the wedding, they rode down to town together. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the small church. Nothing elaborate, just a few witnesses and the minister. But as they made their final preparations, Mara felt anticipation building like a physical force. They spent the night before the wedding apart, Rourke staying at Morrison's place in town while Mara remained at the boarding house. It felt strange, wrong even, to sleep alone after months of sharing a bed. But Judith Morrison had insisted on tradition, and Mara found herself grateful for the time to gather her thoughts. She woke early on her wedding day to a knock on the door. When she opened it, Judith stood there with 3 other women, their arms full of flowers and supplies.
We're here to help you get ready, Judith announced. Every bride deserves attendance, and we decided you needed some whether you asked or not. Mara's throat tightened. She'd expected to prepare alone, to walk to the church by herself. The kindness of these women, most of whom she barely knew, was almost overwhelming. They filled the next hours with gentle bustle. They helped her into her dress, arranged her hair, wove wildflowers into a simple crown. One of the women produced a small mirror, and Mara stared at her reflection in wonder. She looked happy, radiant even. The woman in the mirror was someone who knew her own worth, who walked into her future with confidence. "You're beautiful," Judith said softly. "Caleb's a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Mara replied. The church was small and simple, weathered wood and plain glass windows. But when Mara walked through the door on Judith's arm, it was the most beautiful place she'd ever seen, because at the front, waiting for her with an expression of absolute wonder, was Caleb Rourke. He wore a clean shirt and had trimmed his beard, but it was his eyes that held her, full of love and promise, and the knowledge that they were choosing this, choosing each other, with full awareness and open hearts. The ceremony was brief. The minister spoke about partnership and commitment, about the sanctity of vows freely given. But Mara barely heard him. She was focused on Caleb's hands holding hers, on the way his thumb stroked her knuckles, on the slight tremor in his voice when he repeated his vows. "I, Caleb Rourke, take you, Mara Ellison, to be my wife. I promise to stand beside you, to work with you, to trust you with all that I am. I promise to value your strength, to support your dreams, and to love you with everything in me for as long as I live." Mara's voice was steady when it was her turn, despite the tears sliding down her cheeks. "I, Mara Ellison, take you, Caleb Rourke, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you, to work with you, to trust you with all that I am. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face whatever comes with courage, and to love you with everything in me for as long as I live." The minister pronounced them married, and Caleb kissed her as if they were the only two people in the world. The small gathering applauded, and Mara felt something shift deep in her chest, the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. She was Mara Rourke now, chosen and choosing, free and claimed, strong enough to stand alone and brave enough to stand together. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Morrison had arranged for food and drink at his home, and the small group of witnesses toasted the couple with genuine warmth. Even some of the men Caleb had helped rescue from the mine came to offer their congratulations, their respect evident in every word. Vernon Pritchard was notably absent, as was Judge Bickford. Mara didn't care. The people who mattered were here, and the ones who'd tried to diminish her no longer had any power. As the sun began to set, Caleb pulled her aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Rourke?" The name sent a thrill through her. "More than ready, Mr. Rourke." They said their goodbyes and rode out of town under a sky turning gold and pink. The journey back to the cabin felt different now, not a retreat, but a homecoming. When they finally arrived and Caleb lifted her down from the horse, Mara looked around at the clearing, the cabin, the mountains rising all around them. This was hers now, not by purchase or charity or desperate necessity, but by choice, by love, by the vows they'd spoken and the life they'd built together. Caleb carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. Inside, the cabin glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. He set her down gently, and they stood facing each other in the quiet. "I love you," Mara said. "I don't think I'll ever get tired of saying it." "Good." Caleb pulled her close. "Because I'll never get tired of hearing it." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Mara. The day I walked into that courthouse and saw you standing there, that was the day my life started making sense. Even though I was terrified and angry and probably looked ready to murder someone, especially because of that," he smiled. "You were magnificent, are magnificent, and now you're mine, and I'm yours, and that's everything." They made love that night with a tenderness that took Mara's breath away. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a declaration. When they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Mara traced patterns on Caleb's chest and felt peace settle over her like a blanket. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked.
his hand stroking her hair. That I'm happy. She said it with wonder, as if testing the words. Not just content or safe or grateful, actually genuinely happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way. Me either. He kissed the top of her head. Turns out we were both wrong about what was possible. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the future stretching ahead bright with promise. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines and the stars wheeled overhead. The mountains stood watch, solid and eternal, sheltering the life being built in their shadow. Mara woke first the next morning, sunlight streaming through the window. She lay quietly, watching Caleb sleep, marveling at the reality of him. This man who'd saved her by treating her like a person, who'd loved her by seeing her strength instead of her flaws, who'd built a partnership based on honesty and trust. When his eyes opened and found hers, the smile that crossed his face was pure joy. "Good morning, wife," he said. "Good morning, husband." Mara leaned down to kiss him. "Ready to start the rest of our lives?" "With you?" Caleb pulled her closer. "I've been ready since the moment I first saw you." They rose and began their day, coffee and breakfast, chores and conversation, the simple rhythm of shared life. But everything felt different now, brighter somehow. They were building something real here, something that would last, a partnership forged in adversity and tempered by love. As Mara worked in the garden later that morning, her wedding ring catching the sunlight, she thought about the woman she'd been just months ago. Broken, hopeless, convinced her life was over. That woman would never have believed she could end up here, married to a good man, living in a place where her strength was valued, building a future on her own terms. But she had. She'd survived the humiliation and fear and fought her way to something better. She'd been brave enough to trust, strong enough to work, wise enough to recognize love when it appeared in unexpected places. Caleb emerged from the barn and crossed to where she knelt among the vegetables. He crouched beside her, brushing dirt from her cheek with gentle fingers. "You look thoughtful," he observed. "Just grateful." Mara covered his hand with hers. "For all of this. For you. For the chance to become who I was always meant to be." "You were always that person." Caleb's voice was firm. "You just needed the space to let her out. I didn't make you strong, Mara. I just had the good sense to recognize what was already there." She kissed him there in the garden, surrounded by growing things and golden light, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The journey from that courthouse platform to this mountain clearing had been hard, but it had brought her home, to partnership, to purpose, to a love that saw her completely and chose her anyway, to herself. The weeks following the wedding settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. Mara moved through her days with a lightness she'd never known. The weight of uncertainty finally lifted. She was building something permanent here, something that belonged to her as much as it belonged to Caleb. The garden flourished under her care. The cabin took on small touches that made it feel like a true home. And every morning she woke beside her husband with gratitude that still surprised her. But the mountains had their own timeline, and peace was never guaranteed for long. The first snow came early that year, dusting the peaks in mid-September and sending animals into a frenzy of preparation. Caleb increased his hunting, working long days to build up their stores of meat. Mara preserved everything she could: vegetables from the garden, wild berries from the hills, herbs she'd learned to identify. They worked in tandem, anticipating each other's needs, moving around each other with the practiced ease of people who'd found their fit. One afternoon in early October, Mara was rendering fat for candles when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Her stomach dropped. She wiped her hands and reached for the rifle just as Caleb burst through the door from the barn. "Inside," he said tersely. "Now!" They'd barely barred the door when someone pounded on it hard enough to rattle the frame. "Rourke! Open up! Sheriff's business!" Caleb and Mara exchanged glances. He crossed to the window and peered out. Then his shoulders relaxed fractionally. "It's actually Sheriff Daniels." He opened the door, keeping himself between Mara and the visitors. Sheriff Daniels stood on the threshold, flanked by two deputies. He was an older man, weathered and competent, with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. Behind them, Mara could see 3 more horses, and tied to one of them, hands bound, was Scar. "Sorry to intrude," Daniels said,
But we need to ask you both some questions. Caleb's jaw tightened. About what? About an accusation that's been made. Daniels glanced at Scar, whose face was battered and swollen. This man claims you attacked him and his associates without provocation 6 weeks back. Says you threatened to kill them if they came on your property again. That's not exactly how it happened, Caleb said carefully. Why don't you tell me how it did happen then? Daniels removed his hat. May we come in? This is going to take a while. Caleb stepped aside and the sheriff entered, leaving his deputies outside with the prisoner. Mara offered coffee, her hand steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. This was what she'd have been afraid of, that Caleb's past, his reputation, would come back to destroy what they'd built. Daniels settled at the table and pulled out a worn notebook. Start from the beginning, Caleb. What happened the day these men came up here? Caleb told the story plainly, leaving nothing out. The 3 men appearing uninvited, demanding money, the lewd suggestions about Mara, his warning, their refusal to leave the moment Scar had reached for his gun. He described throwing the knife, the deliberate miss, the clear message sent. And you witnessed all this, Mrs. Rourke? Daniels turned to Mara. Every word. Mara's voice was firm. They came here looking for trouble. They made crude comments about me, implied they could take payment in ways that had nothing to do with money. Caleb gave them multiple chances to leave peacefully. They chose not to take them. Daniels made notes, his expression neutral. Scar tells a different story. Says you invited them up here to discuss business, then turned violent when negotiations didn't go your way. That's a lie, Mara said flatly. We'd never seen those men before that day. We didn't invite anyone, and there were no negotiations. They were trying to intimidate us, and when that didn't work, they threatened violence. Can anyone corroborate your version of events? Just each other, Caleb admitted. But you know my history, Daniels. You know I don't start fights I don't need to finish. If I'd wanted to hurt them, they wouldn't have ridden away. Daniels nodded slowly. That's actually why I'm here, instead of taking you in on Scar's word alone. I know you, Caleb. Know you're not the type to attack without cause. He flipped through his notebook. Also helps that Scar and his boys have a reputation for exactly the kind of behavior you described. They've been run out of 3 camps in the last year for theft and intimidation. Relief flooded through Mara, but she kept her expression controlled. So you believe us? I believe you. Daniels closed his notebook. But I needed to hear it directly, needed to see your faces when you told the story. Too many times people lie to protect themselves or each other, and the truth gets buried. He stood. I'm going to recommend no charges be filed. You were defending your home and your wife. That's your right. Caleb extended his hand. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Daniel shook his hand firmly. Scar's got friends, and they're not going to be happy about him being arrested. You two need to stay vigilant, keep that rifle loaded, and don't hesitate to use it if you need to. After the sheriff left, taking Scar and his deputies with him, Mara sank into a chair. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky. Caleb knelt beside her, his hands on her knees. You all right? He asked. I thought they were going to take you. Her voice cracked. I thought I was going to lose you to some trumped-up charge, and there'd be nothing I could do about it. Hey. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. I'm not going anywhere. Daniels knows the truth, and the law's on our side. Scar's going to pay for his crimes, and we're going to be fine. You can't promise that. No, he admitted, but I can promise that I'll fight like hell to stay with you, that I'll do everything in my power to protect what we've built here. He kissed her gently. We're stronger together than anything that could come at us separately. Remember that. She did remember, and over the following weeks, as autumn deepened toward winter, that strength was tested in ways neither of them anticipated. The trouble started small. Supplies they'd ordered in town went missing. A fence was torn down, letting their few chickens scatter. Someone left a dead rabbit on their doorstep, a clear message of intimidation. Caleb wanted to ride to town and confront Scar's associates directly, but Mara convinced him to wait. If you go down there angry, you'll play right into their hands, she argued. They want you to lose control, to do something that'll give them justification to come after you legally. We can't give them that. So we just sit here and take it? No. We document everything, tell the sheriff, and let the law handle it. Mara crossed her arms. I know it goes against every instinct you have, but it's the smart play. We beat them by being smarter, not meaner. Caleb studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we do it your way, but if they escalate, we defend ourselves. But only as a last resort. The harassment continued sporadically through October, always small enough to be annoying but not quite threatening enough to warrant sheriff intervention. Mara could see the tension building in Caleb, the way his jaw stayed tight and his hand never strayed far from his knife. She understood the frustration. Being passive went against everything in his nature, but she also understood that patience was its own kind of strength. The breaking point came in early November, just as the first serious snow began to fall. Mara was in the barn feeding the horses when she heard footsteps behind her. She spun, reaching for the pitchfork, but a hand clamped over her mouth and an arm locked around her waist. She fought, kicking and twisting, but her attacker was strong and clearly prepared for resistance. "Stop fighting!" a voice hissed in her ear. One of Scar's men. She recognized him from that first confrontation. "We just want to talk." Mara bit down hard on the hand covering her mouth. The man yelped and loosened his grip just enough for her to scream. "Caleb!" The man tried to silence her again, but Mara drove her elbow into his ribs and spun away. She grabbed the pitchfork and leveled it at him, her heart hammering. "Get out! Now!" "Not until we deliver our message." A second man stepped from the shadows, the younger one from before. "Scar's in jail because of you two. His family's suffering, losing their livelihood. We think you owe them compensation." "We don't owe you anything." Mara's voice was steady despite her fear. "Scar made his choices. He's paying for them." "See, that's where you're wrong." The first man circled slowly, and Mara adjusted her stance to keep the pitchfork between them. "You made him look bad, got him arrested. That's got consequences." The barn door slammed open, and Caleb appeared, his rifle raised. "Get away from my wife!" Both men froze. The one circling put his hands up slowly. "Now, Rourke, we're just having a conversation." "Conversation's over." Caleb's voice was ice. "You've got 5 seconds to get on your horses and ride out. After that, I start shooting. You wouldn't— 1. The men looked at each other, clearly trying to gauge whether he was bluffing. 2. Mara kept the pitchfork steady, watching for any sudden movement. 3. All right. The younger man backed toward the door. "We're leaving, but this isn't over, Rourke. You can't hide up here forever." 4. Caleb didn't lower the rifle. They ran. Mara heard horses leaving at a gallop, the sound fading into the distance. Only then did she lower the pitchfork, her hands starting to shake. Caleb set the rifle aside and crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. "Did they hurt you?" "No. Scared me, but I'm not hurt." She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent. "I fought them off until you got here." "You were incredible." His arms tightened around her. "But this has gone too far. I'm riding to town tomorrow and ending this one way or another." "We're riding to town," Mara corrected. "Together. And we're doing this legally. We file charges for assault and trespassing, get restraining orders if we can, and we make it clear that any further harassment will be met with the full force of the law." Caleb pulled back to look at her. "You really think that'll work? These men don't respect the law." "Maybe not, but the law gives us protection we don't have otherwise." Mara cupped his face. "Trust me. Let's try it my way first. If it doesn't work, then you can do things your way." They rode to town the next morning through falling snow, both of them armed and alert. Sheriff Daniels listened to their account with growing anger, then immediately issued warrants for the 2 men's arrest. He also assigned a deputy to ride regular patrols up to the cabin, making it clear that the Rourkes were under official protection. "This ends now," Daniels told them. "I won't have vigilante justice in my territory, no matter what Scar's associates think they're owed. You have any more trouble? You send word immediately." The word spread quickly through town. By the time Mara and Caleb left the sheriff's office, people were watching from doorways and windows. Some looked sympathetic, others speculative. But no one approached them directly, and no one challenged their right to protection. They were almost to their horse when Vernon Pritchard stumbled out of a saloon, drunk and belligerent as always. Well, the happy couple running to the law like scared children. "What's wrong, Rourke? Can't handle your own problems anymore?" Caleb kept walking, his hand on Mara's elbow, guiding her forward. But Vernon wasn't done. You think you're better than everyone now, Mara? Think because you married this killer you're respectable? Vernon's voice rose. You're still the same worthless cow you always were, just with a different owner. Mara stopped. Caleb tried to pull her forward, but she shook her head. She turned to face Vernon, and the crowd that had been pretending not to watch fell silent. You're right about one thing, Mara said clearly. I am different now. But not because I got married, because I finally realized that your opinion of me, everyone's opinion of me, doesn't define my worth. She took a step toward Vernon, who actually swayed backward. I define my worth. And I know exactly what I'm worth now. I'm worth the life I've built, the partnership I have with my husband, the strength I've earned through hard work and courage. What are you worth, Vernon? Another bottle? Another losing hand at cards? Vernon's face went purple. You ungrateful bitch! That's enough. Sheriff Daniels appeared at Mara's shoulder. Vernon, you're drunk and disorderly. Get yourself home before I throw you in a cell to sleep it off. Vernon looked like he wanted to argue, but the sheriff's hand on his gun discouraged him. He spat at Mara's feet, missing by several inches, and staggered away. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment over. Daniels touched his hat to Mara. Well said, ma'am. About time someone told that bastard what he needed to hear. On the ride home, Caleb was quiet for a long time. Finally, as they climbed into the foothills, he said, I'm proud of you. For what? Losing my temper at a drunk? For standing up for yourself. For knowing your worth and not being afraid to say it out loud. He reached over to squeeze her hand. When I first saw you in that courthouse, you looked like you'd given up, like you'd accepted that you were worth exactly what they said you were. Watching you tell Vernon the truth today, that was something. Mara blinked back sudden tears. I couldn't have done it without you. Without this. She gestured at the mountains around them. You gave me the space to become who I was meant to be. We gave that to each other, Caleb corrected. I was dead up here before you came. Just going through the motions, existing but not living. You reminded me what it feels like to have something worth protecting, worth fighting for. The harassment stopped after that. Whether it was the warrants, the deputy patrols, or simply the realization that the Rourkes wouldn't be intimidated, Mara didn't know and didn't care. The important thing was that they were left in peace as winter settled over the mountains in earnest. The snow came in waves, sometimes gentle and sometimes fierce. Mara learned to read the signs, the quality of the light, the behavior of the animals, the way the wind sounded in the pines. She and Caleb developed a comfortable routine for the long winter days. Work in the morning, rest, and conversation in the afternoon. Evenings by the fire reading or working on small projects. The isolation that might have felt like a prison instead felt like sanctuary. On Christmas Eve, as they sat by the fire watching snow fall outside the window, Caleb pulled a small package from his pocket. I made you something. Mara unwrapped it carefully to find a carved wooden box, smooth and perfect, with her initials, M.R., inscribed on the lid. Inside, lined with soft fabric, was space for her most precious possessions. It's beautiful, she breathed. When did you make this? Been working on it for weeks whenever you weren't watching. He looked almost shy. Figured you needed a place for your ring when you're working and anything else you want to keep safe. Mara set the box aside and kissed him thoroughly. Thank you. I love it. She reached under her chair and pulled out her own gift. A shirt she'd sewn from fabric she'd special ordered months ago, reinforced at all the seams the way he liked, with 2 buttons at the collar. For you. He held it up, examining her careful work, then pulled her into his arms. We're pretty good at this, he said. At what? Gift-giving? At being married, at being partners. He rested his chin on top of her head. At building a life together. We are, Mara agreed. And they were. Day by day, choice by choice, they'd created something strong and real and permanent. Winter gave way to spring, and with the thaw came news from town. Scar had been sentenced to 5 years for his crimes. His associates had scattered, some leaving the territory entirely. Vernon Pritchard had drunk himself to death in a boarding house, alone and unmourned. The world was changing, moving on, while Mara and Caleb built their future in the mountains. In May, Mara realized she was pregnant. She waited 3 weeks to be sure, watching for signs before telling Caleb. She found him in the garden one morning, working to expand the growing space, and simply said, "We're going to need to build a cradle." He looked up, confused. "A cradle? What for?" Understanding dawned across his face. "Mara, are you—" "Yes." She smiled through sudden tears. "We're going to have a baby. Sometime in December, I think." Caleb stood slowly, setting down his shovel, his expression stunned. Then he crossed to her and sank to his knees, pressing his face against her still flat stomach. His shoulders shook, and Mara realized he was crying. This strong, stoic man who'd faced down danger without flinching was overcome by the simple reality of new life. "I never thought—" His voice broke. "Never let myself think about this, about having a family." Mara ran her fingers through his hair. "We're a family already. This just makes us more." He looked up at her, his face wet with tears but transformed by joy. "I'm terrified. What if I don't know how to be a father? What if I mess it up?" "Then we'll mess it up together and figure it out as we go." She pulled him to his feet. "That's what we do, isn't it? We face things together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Judith Morrison rode up regularly to check on Mara, bringing advice and supplies and reassurance. Caleb became almost comically protective, trying to prevent Mara from lifting anything heavier than a spoon. She bore it with patient amusement, knowing it came from love rather than a desire to control. In July, they made the decision to expand the cabin, adding a second bedroom for the baby. Caleb worked on it with single-minded determination, and by September they had a beautiful new space with windows looking out toward the mountains. Mara made curtains and a quilt, her stitches careful and even, putting love into every piece. As her due date approached, they prepared as best they could. Judith agreed to come stay with them for the last month, and a midwife from town promised to make the journey when the time came. Caleb stockpiled supplies like they were preparing for a siege, determined that nothing would be lacking when their child arrived. The baby came 3 weeks early, on a cold December morning when the world was blanketed in fresh snow. Mara woke to contractions at dawn and knew immediately that this was it. Caleb sent for the midwife while Judith helped Mara prepare, her calm competence a steadying force. The labor was long and difficult. Mara had known it would be, first babies usually were, but knowing didn't make it easier. She clung to Caleb's hand, drawing strength from his presence, from his whispered encouragements, from the absolute certainty in his eyes that she could do this. When their daughter finally arrived, pink and squalling and perfect, Mara looked at Caleb's face and saw everything they'd built together reflected there. All the pain, all the struggle, all the choices that had led them to this moment. "She's beautiful," Caleb whispered, his finger stroking the baby's tiny hand. "Perfect, just like her mother." They named her Sarah, after Caleb's mother. She had Mara's dark hair and Caleb's gray eyes, and from the moment she drew breath, she owned them both completely. Judith stayed another week to help, teaching Mara the basics of infant care and reassuring Caleb that babies were tougher than they looked. When she finally left, she hugged Mara tightly. "You're going to be wonderful parents," she said. "That little girl is lucky to have you both." As winter deepened and they settled into the rhythm of life with a newborn, Mara often found herself marveling at the journey that had brought her here. From that courthouse platform where she'd been auctioned like property to this warm cabin where she rocked her daughter by firelight while her husband slept nearby, it seemed impossible that one life could contain such transformation. But it had. She'd survived humiliation and fear, found strength she didn't know she possessed, built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. She'd gone from being told she was worthless to knowing, truly knowing, her own value. One night in late January, as she nursed Sarah in the quiet darkness, Caleb woke and came to sit beside them. He wrapped his arm around Mara's shoulders, and together they watched their daughter, her tiny fist curled against Mara's breast, her eyes already drifting closed. "Do you ever think about that day?" Mara asked quietly. "In the courthouse?" "Sometimes." Caleb's voice was low. "I think about how close I came to not going to town that day. How if I'd stayed on the mountain, I never would have met you." "Do you regret it?"
taking me on?" He turned to look at her, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. "Regret it? Mara, claiming you was the first smart thing I'd done in 5 years. You didn't just change my life, you saved it, gave me a reason to be more than just a man hiding from his past." "You saved me too." Mara leaned her head against his shoulder. "In every way that matters."
They sat like that until Sarah fell fully asleep. Then Caleb carried her to the cradle he'd made with his own hands. As they climbed back into bed, Mara thought about the future that stretched ahead. Years of raising their daughter, of working this land, of growing old together in these mountains. It wouldn't always be easy. There would be hard winters and lean times, illness and loss and all the difficulties that came with frontier life. But they would face it together, with the strength they'd forged in adversity and the love they'd chosen to build. Years later, when Sarah was old enough to ask questions, Mara would tell her the story. Not the sanitized version, but the truth, about the courthouse, and the humiliation, about the mountain man who'd bought her freedom and then given her so much more, about how strength came in many forms, and how the most important choice anyone could make was to keep moving forward, to keep believing in the possibility of something better. She would tell Sarah about the power of partnership, of two people choosing each other not out of desperation, but out of genuine respect and love. About how home wasn't a place but a feeling, built from shared work and honest truth and the courage to be vulnerable. And she would make sure Sarah understood that she was born from love, real love, the kind that saw every flaw and chose to stay anyway, the kind that made you brave enough to face whatever came next. But for now, as Mara drifted off to sleep with Caleb's arm around her and their daughter breathing softly in her cradle, she simply felt grateful. Grateful for the journey that had led her here, grateful for the strength that had carried her through, grateful for the life she'd built from the ashes of who she'd been told she had to be. In the morning, the sun would rise over the mountains, bathing the clearing in golden light. Smoke would curl from the chimney. The creek would burble over its stones, and the Rourke family would wake to another day of their chosen life, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Mara had been told she was worthless, too big, too much, undeserving of love or dignity. She'd been sold like property and mocked by a crowd. But she'd survived, more than survived. She'd thrived. She'd found her strength, claimed her worth, and built a life of purpose and meaning. The woman who'd stood trembling on that auction platform was gone, transformed into someone who knew exactly who she was and what she deserved. A wife, a mother, a partner. Strong and capable, and deeply, genuinely loved. The town that had laughed faded into irrelevance, its judgment powerless against the truth she and Caleb had created together. They had claimed their own story, written their own ending, and it was beautiful.